All right. Who doesn't know rolled? People, okay? So rolled, I'm so excited about this conversation. I first met Bao and asked him to be a speaker at the inaugural Australia-Vietnam Young Leadership Dialogue in 2007. That's where I first met him, and rolled has become a slight empire, I have to say. So round of applause for Bao, the founder, and rolled and CEO. So Bao, can you tell us a little bit about how you started it? Because I don't know whether many people know about this story. They know a brand, but how did it come to manifest, and what is the scale of the business today?
First off, thanks for having me, Hal, and the team. Can't tell, we had you at our conference actually last year, which is phenomenal. But always mindful that we get the graveyard shifts. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing.
Look at they've stayed.
A lot of people have stayed, so that's a positive. So that's excellent. Well, I might take us a couple of steps back. So I was born in Melbourne, bred in Melbourne, grew up in Melbourne, had a great education. My parents were refugees, left Vietnam in 1981, was in a Thai refugee camp, might have been similar. And then came into Australia in 1982. I was born here a couple of months after they landed. I grew up knowing identity, but I knew where I was, which was a refugee son, and grew up knowing my identity in that way. Going to that point, I look at my son who's sitting there, who's 18, who's just started uni, my wife's there as well, and I go, my challenge is now making sure that my son understands identity, and my children understand identity. And I think that's one of the reasons actually why we were not pushed into it, but really forcing our way to actually starting a food business called Rolled. The essence of it and the start of it is actually my wife and I, our idea back in about 2010. She's Filipino, but she loves Vietnamese food more than I do. And so most of the essence around the brand and the love of our food is actually from my wife. And that's where it started. So we started in 2012. I'm a physiotherapist by profession. So growing up, going to uni, I did everything that my parents really wanted me to do. Ran physio practices for 10 years, and then said, you know what? I came home to mum and dad and said, I'm giving them all up and I'm going to run a Vietnamese food business. So that didn't go quite down very well.
Like, what was their reaction?
So we got a couple of barriers. I had barriers with family. So mum and dad were pretty angry for a while. They came around because then they started working for us as we started to grow the business. But we started in 2012 in Melbourne. For those that may have seen our first store, we had queues of about 150 people every lunchtime in Melbourne CBD, which was amazing. We served about 1,000 people every 1.5 hours, and shut the doors because we couldn't fit any more food into the fridges to sell. And at that point in time, we sort of knew we had something. We started the business because we knew how great Vietnamese food is. And our mission, and still is to share our love of Vietnamese food and culture with the world. And that's really why we started it.
Wow, how amazing. I have so many questions. And I'll also leave some time at the end for any of you to ask some questions as well. So please be prepared. We don't always have someone like Bao here. So Bao, what's the scale of the business now? Because it's franchises, right? And in what countries? Is it mainly in Australia? Are you able to share numbers with us? You've raised capital, all that sort of stuff. Founder journey stuff.
Happy to share as much as we want. So we're at about 100 stores only in Australia at the moment. We've sold licenses into Singapore, New Zealand, India, and looking other parts of the world. Definitely a founder's journey, so very challenging. We invested all of our life savings into the business for the first sort of 5 or 6 years of the journey, sold all of our physio businesses, invested it into Rolled. We then brought on some capital along the journey, and I literally just finished a round of capital late January to just solidify the business, make it a bit stronger post-COVID, because COVID was challenging, as you can imagine, for most food businesses, particularly like ours, in shopping centres, and now sort of building up for the next phase of growth.
Wow, it's so incredible that it's still a founder-led business as well, because I think a lot of people just constantly look at exiting, and when your purpose is about, sharing something that is so deeply part of who you are, it's I speak to other founders, they're like, how do I exit my life? If this is my life, my culture, who I am, it's like, one thing I wanted to ask is when your parents, because as people with a Vietnamese background, we have a very a strong obligation, connection, piety, loyalty to your parents, that's ingrained in us, heal. And when they're like, no, and they're angry with you, what still made you keep going with this? Especially because the reason why many migrant parents, we're not talking just Vietnamese, is because migrant parents that come over, they face so much difficulty that all they want is stability. All they want for their children is a sense of security. And then for you to take the sense of security that you've had in these chiropractor businesses, because you had several.
Physio, that's right.
Sorry, physio. Boo, chiropractors. Physio.
Boo.
Physio, to take that and risk it, which I think many parents would see as a betrayal, right? Like, especially from a refugee experience. What was that? And how did you have the conviction to keep persisting?
I think a couple of things that helped me. One was I already had a family. So I was married, I had one child or two children at the time. That helps with mum and dad, like where they go, whatever it is, taking a few steps forward. The other ones, I think they saw I was already successful in business. And they said, let's support him and be involved in the journey as well. And I think that those are probably the two factors. I'm a pretty stubborn guy. Like I will follow through and I'll drive it. And you said before, one of the factors of success is drive, and I'll always back what I absolutely deem to be the most important thing to be able to do. And I had the support of my wife.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. I'm looking over there. It's just like, is he stubborn? She's like, stubborn. But behind every great person like you, there's someone who's even greater. So I think shout out to mum, Ange, wife, partner. Amazing. Thank you. So as you built this business, which has Vietnamese culture as the soul of what it is that you produce, how has your relationship to your own identity and maybe to Vietnam, how has that evolved over this journey of Rolled?
Yeah, like when the questions came up, I thought that was a really sort of poignant question for me, and it's probably more of a question that I've answered for myself over the last 2 or 3 years as I've gone through, and we've spoken about this, many of my own personal challenges and mental and physical health and those sort of things, and go, what's really important? And it was about that time where I started to really dig in to go, the cultural strength of Vietnamese is what I wanted to bring out. There's also a lot of challenges being Vietnamese, and going, Vietnamese have, go back to the start of the business. One of the challenges we had was we had to battle so many commentary around, if those have grown up in Vietnam in Australia going, food was seen as risk of salmonella. So this is something that we grow up in Australia.
That, yeah.
We had lots of poisoning. So we actually made the effort to bring our kitchens forward so people could see what was actually in the kitchens. To bring in the culture of our food, but actually showing people more so with what our food really was. So that was a big part of the step that we made to make sure that we embraced our Vietnamese heritage, but also taking it out of where it's sort of grown up from. And that was important to us.
Yeah, wow. I do remember that. I do remember there was a big scandal about salmonella poisoning in like a banh mi thing. And then, but during that context of a lot of racism and so forth, and, you know, we saw it with COVID as well, with Chinese restaurants being, you know, like vandalized and whatever, that still persists, you know, but that you were able to go, you know what, we see that, we recognize that. And how do we draw on our heritage to say, you know what, how do we battle that? And how do we make it open by bringing the kitchens forward?
And just share great food. We knew that Vietnamese, or we know that Vietnamese food is one of the best cuisines in the world. It's just our responsibility. And it's a responsibility that I take it on as a pretty strong responsibility to make sure that we deliver as good a product as we can. And I think that's a big part of what we do, and it's a big part of what we've actually done to transform the business over the last 2 or 3 years.
Yeah, awesome. How do you, before I pivot into like really talking to you about like entrepreneurship, you know, I want to ask about, in Australia, you have this big food business around Vietnamese food, but you also have a lot of customer base who's not Vietnamese, you know, very diverse people, diverse teams. What's that balance between remaining authentic and also innovation and evolving, you know, like the product and customer needs? What's that about?
Well, I think it's mostly being authentic. Like, we try to stick to the authenticity part, but be a little bit commercial in what we do for the local palate. But that lens that we put on it is always constant. So we're always making sure and being very clear with the rest of the business that this is more important than anything. Yeah, but it's got to be at the top of the priority list. Yeah, rather than worrying about other aspects of. Trust me, if you heard what some of our NPD said, new product development that get banded around in our business, you'd be shocked. But our responsibility is to make sure we hold that firm.
Wow. That's so beautiful. That's so beautiful. I think it really actually reflects on you as a founder, you know, like if you are proud of your culture, if you are proud of your identity and your heritage, then you protect it, you know, as opposed to sort of compromising on, right.
And that's probably the journey that I've gone on. You know, so you sort of said, and you mentioned it a little bit before, when growing up as a 15-year-old, didn't want to eat, thịt kho, but now would absolutely die for mum's thịt kho every week, you know. And so this transition, or go to school camps and then go, you know what, I loved eating the lasagna. Well, and I still do, but geez, I'm more than happy to eat a lot of other things as well. So that whole cultural identity and the shift in mindset has come only really in the last sort of decade or so. Yeah, and I think it's an interesting sort of shift, and maybe that's because there's more pride in Vietnam in what we've done, you know, in the last decade, 2 decades as a nation as well. And I think we're all starting to see that as well.
Yeah, I think, you know, for many people in Australia, if you grow up as a racial minority, you know, there's a concept called racial battle fatigue. It's actually researched and it's an academic term. And it's actually the physical and mental and emotional stress that a person of colour experiences in a country like Australia is equivalent to a soldier in combat. But it's actually just unconscious, but it's stored there. The physical stress, the emotional stress, the mental stress. And what you've been able to do is evolve your relationship to your identity in a way where you can, because the odds are against you. You know, if you're in Vietnam, it's actually very easy for you to be proud of your culture because it's everywhere. It's everywhere. It's very difficult for you to be openly authentic and embrace your culture in a country like Australia. And you've been able to do it. And I think at this point, you know, I think Rolled has done a tremendous job in helping so many people just feel seen. You know, when I go to the airport and I see Rolled, Vietnamese and all of that, I feel, yes. Right. I'm like, yes, people, come on, round of applause, yes. I feel proud. I feel like, look, This is not like less than all those other, other foods. So about your founder's journey, wow. Prepare a question. I would love for you to ask a question as a founder too. What do you think in building this business has been the biggest challenge that you've had to overcome? Or one of the biggest challenges?
That's a very loaded question. How long do we have?
This much time.
An interesting one, and I think we've spoken about culture and change and how that's affected. From my perspective, it's been getting to know myself. Okay, so actually going through a massive journey over, like I said before, over the last 5 or 6 years and going, what do I truly want to be? How do I actually want to be known for? What really, truly makes me happy? Wow. And like I've gone through it and the fad words of dopamine hits and all that. I love dopamine hits, the guy that in every form, okay? And so, and you know what? A long time, quick dopamine hits were great.
Yeah.
But what I realised was they weren't what really caused me happiness or gave me happiness, and I've changed my life. Like I've changed my life in so many different ways over the last year, but I've had to dig deep. That's one thing for me is understanding and knowing myself and knowing what really makes me tick and makes me the best person I can be. And that's taken a journey, but it's actually been one where I've opened up, spoken to so many people about it, and asked for help. And that journey of help and actually learning from others has actually been the biggest lesson for me since I started the business. And that, for me, allows me to build for the next 20, 30 years. If you're going to talk about longevity in this business, I see the longevity being the next 20 or 30 years.
Wow, amazing. Well done. Well done, Bao, because I coach CEOs, I coach founders, I coach a whole range of different people. And, when people get on particular entrepreneurship journey, sometimes they're led like by opportunity and product, first and market opportunity. But it's actually in the long term, understanding deeply what needs to be expressed, what the difference between happiness and fulfillment. And I think when you talk about dopamine, there's like 3 different levels of, happiness moving down to fulfillment. One is actually short-term and experiences. And they give you those hits, you travel, but then you come back to your life and you're sad again, right? And then there's a second level where you get a deeper, more sustained level of, happiness, and that is where you get to use your natural skill set and express, what's there. But then that is also sort of not fully fulfilled, sustained. And then the third is you get to use all of what you have. And in my framework, I actually have documented all of these elements, but in service. You use it, but not just only for yourself, but you use it as a way to serve and contribute to something beyond your own life. And I think it's incredible that you've been able to dig deep. I know that it would have been an incredibly difficult journey to go inwards and to confront all those different things. But what you're saying is that has understanding, getting that clarity has helped fuel your founder journey until today. Wow.
And that need, I think, and I will say it's a need, the need to give back. You said it before, to faith or give back, and that's what's really driven us as an organisation over the last, since we started, giving back to the kids in Vietnam through Blue Dragon, which is a foundation we support pretty heavily, and continue to do so. And so finding that and actually being true about that, like a lot of people say it, but a lot of people only do it when they can and they have some money to do it or whatever it might be. And we did it when we didn't have any money, and we keep doing it when we have some money. We do it when we don't have money. But it's a responsibility that we see as an important one.
Wow, that's beautiful. Bao, what do you think would be a tip or advice that you would love to give any person who wants to start their entrepreneurship journey, whether it doesn't matter where it is, what would you tell them?
I think there's two, and I was thinking about this. One is a term called native genius. So this is by an author called Liz Wiseman. She talks about it in a book called Multipliers, and it's really digging and going, okay, what do you do brilliantly, better than anyone else, and you do easily, and you love to do? Yeah, it's a slight skew on what we've been talking about for the day, but that's an important one, and being true about that and understanding that. The next one is learning, like constantly learning. It's something that I've started to do much more in the last 3 or 4 years, and whether that's through podcasts or through audiobooks or talking to people, that openness to learning. I said 2, but there's actually 3. The last one, and it's a funny one, where it's about taking risks. We've spoken about it before. Someone mentioned it, like, I think you did, Celia, did someone die? Yeah, that's the point. But Jeff Bezos famously says and fights for what he talks about is the 1 or 2 door decision, which is it a 1 door or 2 door? If it's 2 doors, you can walk back through. Yeah, most people get so stifled by making a decision and just doing that they never get there. And I'll give you an example. When we started the business back in 2012, I reckon I got about 100 emails from people saying, I thought about doing it, but I was going to do it next year. You beat me to it. Well, I was going to do it, yeah, and that's so common in entrepreneurship, where most people have great ideas. But just jumping through and actually take a risk. But okay, I know it's not as easy for everyone to do. I totally get it. But you never know if you actually never know. Yeah, and I think that's for me. As long as no one's going to die, Celia, which most likely they won't, giving it a crack, but knowing that you can walk back through. Yeah, and that's, I think, the opportunity. Anyone sitting here probably has that opportunity to actually walk back through, and I think that's a really important one.
Wow. So, in Vietnamese, I love this concept we have. It's called Jung. Jung. It's like the combination of the right conditions at a certain time for something to just manifest. So if you have 2 seeds and you put one here and then one over there, this one has the right conditions, the sun, the soil, the pH level, whatever, and then this will sprout and then this doesn't. So it's almost trying to create the best conditions and being alert to that, so to see what will happen, and also going beneath and saying, okay, what's in me? What's most me? You already have a risk appetite. I know that. You're stubborn. You have the risk appetite. You've got that, and so then you've been able to sort of create those conditions, and those conditions included that you had Ange. You had a family, you built a business before that. Because if you just graduated and then you went into this, I don't believe it would have been there today. And so I think what I can take from your journey, Bao, that possibly other people, is like to really take a step back at your life and listen to yourself and observe and to understand what is the Jung that is happening, what are the conditions that is being organized, and what is wanting to be manifested. And this is the framework that I took 20 years to develop to help people to actually identify what that is. And tomorrow we have the workshop. We still have some places left, and I would love to see some of you there. So now I'd love to ask the audience, do you have any questions of Bao? Yes, Natalie. Okay. Do we have any mics? Yep, there's a mic coming here, Natalie. A Melbourne person as well?
Yes. Val, thank you. Incredible. So thanks for sharing your insights. You talked about the franchise structure. How hard or easy has it been to ensure that quality and that authenticity that you've developed as a founder has been able to be sustained through franchise?
Oh, super challenging. Yeah, and to give you a perspective, we started the business, and one of the first objectives I actually had on my whiteboard back in a little warehouse was one of our key franchise targets was actually Vietnamese Australians. So Vietnamese that were born or had grown up in Australia. And at last count, we've got about 2.
Oh my.
Okay, out of about 50. Okay, so for me, that's a massive challenge, but also a massive opportunity. Yeah, I think there's a component of whether, we're seeing it recently come out a bit more where there's a lot more Vietnamese that are proud of rolled. But if you go 7 years ago, 10 years ago, people were like, oh, they don't know what they're doing, or they're a fake roll, Vietnamese. Like most of the recipes are mum's recipes. Yeah, like that. The pho in our stores is actually mum's 100-year-old recipe.
Wow.
Yeah, but people don't know it, and so they just go, oh, it's just the whitewashed version of Vietnamese food, and that's okay. But our job is to just keep doing our job and doing it really well. But we're starting to see a lot more Vietnamese be proud, and that's an enormous opportunity for us to then go, you know what, let's make sure that there's a lot more people that are proud of Vietnamese food that come into the system that then continue to translate that through. But the battle we've got around keeping consistency and authenticity in our business is constant. And it's something that we absolutely fire off and make sure that we're on top of as much as we can and as often as we can. Yeah. Thank you, Natalie.
Wow. I want to make a connection here. And thank you, Natalie, for that question, because there's a correlation going on between the number of Australian Vietnamese that don't go to Vietnam and then the people who there's only 2 out of your 100 franchises. Now, this has not been researched, but I'm going to throw something out there. So I think there's 2 things going on that might explain. The Vietnamese diaspora here, from 75, right? We've got different categories, of course. For me, there's 6 categories and not 3, but I'll tell you that later. So it's rooted in a refugee history. That's trauma, right? So that's survival. That's deep fear. That's deep scarcity. So we are rooted in that as Australian Vietnamese, the origins of the diaspora. And then on top of that, we've got something else going on. We've got the Australian culture. Australian culture is very different to, say, American culture. So we have 2 layers of risk aversion happening. If you talk to any venture capitalist, they say, for me to go to the US, I can raise money like that. For Australia, the same amount of effort, I don't raise anything. Because the risk appetite and the liberalism and the individualism of like, go higher, more, and it's more individualist, it's more capitalist, it's less risk averse. Australia is an island continent. We don't border anybody. And so our island continent state, we have seen in capital, we have seen in the lack of Australian businesses investing in Vietnam compared to the US, compared to other countries. So as a population of Australians, we are more risk averse than others. So for Australian Vietnamese, we've got a double barrel going on. We've got compounding effects. The effect that our refugee heritage original diaspora gets scarcity fear-based, risk-averse, and then we've got the compounding effect of the Australian culture on top of that, right? And so I think hopefully, more inspiring stories like Bao, we can see that people like him and entrepreneurs play an extremely important role, because Australia is going to stagnate if we keep on continuing with this island continent risk-averse mentality. So the role of entrepreneurship is extremely important for us to prosper. Okay, I don't know if that makes sense to anybody, but that's just my 2 cents okay, last question. How do you have any questions? Since you are the founder of Vietcetera, this is your thing. I want to... No pressure, but I want to reserve a question for you from founder to founder.
Yeah. Bao, I first heard of your name from a mutual friend of mine that owns a bunch of bars here with you. Actually, this was 8 years ago. Tom Radigan and Ann Radigan. Mm-hmm. They're hustlers too. They brought Habeco, Beer Hanoi, into Australia something like 10 years ago. They found the contact for the distributor. They got it here, and they're still doing it today at Roll 2, I think. But anyways, my question for you is, how do you manage the disappointment that you might impose on other people, like either your parents, I mean, that was like a decade ago probably, but also even your staff, when you have like radical ideas and you're just like pushing people. How do you manage that? Because even this event, actually, I disappointed a lot of people at the company. It's like, what are you doing? You're crazy. You're like, and,
I think if I held on to disappointing other people, then I'd probably won't be here. But I did for a long time now. Yeah, like for a long time, I took everything as it's my fault. Yeah, my parents, my staff, my franchise partners. But you know what? I've learned to actually say, well, you can't control everything. You can't control everyone. You can control what you can do. Yeah, and I think that's the dive that I've done. And go, you know what? As long as I've done what I said I was going to do, then that helps. But our business runs like the Vietnam roads as well. Like it runs in multiple different ways, and some people have come into the business and been able to deal with it. Some people can't. Yeah, and that's been natural, and that's been part of the nature of our business since it started. You know, and I think that was pretty eye-opening to me, actually. Okay, you know what? I've always forever said, I need to change the business and make it a little bit more corporate. But that's not me.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's not the way we need to run, because why? Why do we have to run like that?
That's right.
And I've only just realised that in the last couple of months.
Wow.
Yeah, we will run it the way we feel like we need to run it and take responsibility for that.
Oh, yes. 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 You know, there's a quote from a leadership coach called Jerry Colonna, and he says that the truest act of leadership is becoming yourself. Becoming yourself. So I feel that, you know, in my work, what I help people to do is to become themselves. And I think Bao and his role journey has been a beautiful vehicle for you to grow into that, to teething into that. And therefore, you're more becoming yourself every day, and that you allow others to come into your ecosystem who can become themselves too if it aligns. And that includes embracing our culture, embracing our ancient, incredible culture and the stories of our lineage that help fuel and create what it is that needs to be created, and that can last way beyond our lifetimes. Thank you so much to Bao, everybody. Thank you. It's a wonderful chat.